Welcome to the Tuning In podcast, where we talk alignment, intuition, and our internal guidance system. We cover woo-woo topics in an approachable and practical way. I'm your host, Dana Evans of alignful.com. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Tuning In podcast. This is episode 125. So today, if you listened to last week's episode 124, The Squirrel That Broke My Heart, you will want to actually listen to that first if you haven't, because this is a follow-up to that episode. And I think it's really important, like as I'm on this journey, as you're on this journey of having honesty and transparency as we go through this, because I know I shared last week that I felt like I'd really fully processed that squirrel event. And guess what? It turns out I hadn't, and that is okay. But now I really, truly have. And there's a few ways I can tell that. Now I can think about the squirrel and remember the event without feeling super tearful, without feeling emotional, even without feeling like the pang in my chest. And it's interesting because I know last week when I was talking, I did still feel a little emotional. And I'm like, wow, my mind thought that I had processed it fully because I had done a lot of the processing tools, but my body was telling a different story, which of course is why this work that I'm doing is so very, very important, right? The work that all of us get to be doing in emotional processing is it's not about the mind and what the mind thinks should be or is, but really what the body is communicating to us. So that is what we're going to talk about today. Also, please excuse I'm congested. I have a little cold. John returned home. So today's Wednesday. So just over a week ago. So you'll be listening to this episode on Wednesday. So a week ago, he returned home from the Chicago Marathon. He ran the marathon with his friends. I mean, not with them, but they all ran it together. And this is, he's run, I think this is his 6th or 7th marathon, maybe 8th. But he's done Boston, he's done New York, he's done Chicago, San Diego, Grandma's Marathon, which is in, I think, Michigan, maybe, and another one, which was out in Eureka. So he's done a lot. I don't usually go to these because it's not really my jam, giant crowds. No, hard pass. But he went with his friends. Anyway, he returned home and was a little bit sick, and then I picked up some of what he had, but mostly it's manifesting for me as feeling tired and having a scratchy throat, as you can hear. But that's okay. I'm actually feeling quite a bit better than I was a couple days ago. And today is Monday. You'll be listening on Wednesday. Today I'm heading to Santa Fe. And on Wednesday, when you're listening, I'll be heading home from Santa Fe. So I'm recording this at 6:30 a.m. on Monday morning before I drive down to my parents' house to meet them so we can drive to Santa Fe together. So I'm squeezing this in, but it felt really important and I wasn't going to be able to take my microphone on the trip, / I didn't want to. So I thought I would just get this recording out to you and do the follow-up. So that's a little life update. Also, if you haven't already, join the Emotional Edit waitlist, and the doors might be open. You might be able to join the program by the time you're listening, but at the very least, alignful.com/email-capture. And if it's ready to purchase and sign up, you can just click the link down in the show notes. I'll definitely have the correct registration link if you're ready to join. Otherwise, you can ask me questions or find out more on Instagram at Dana_Evans. So those are the updates. Let's rewind to, I recorded this episode on Tuesday last week, episode 124 about the squirrel. And on Thursday, I had a reflexology session with my amazing reflexologist, and she's also how I have Tibetan cranial, not craniosacral, Tibetan cranial, which is a lot of work in the palate, in the mouth, and with the jaw. And she's very amazing, very intuitive. She's also done quite a bit of work. I've worked with her on an emotional clearing capacity, right? So I do that work for other people. I also need that space held for myself as well because I believe so deeply in it. So I've worked with her with that as well. And it's so powerful. So it's interesting because once again, I was feeling like a little spastic and scattered. I had overscheduled my week last week, and it's hilarious, y'all. I overscheduled with fun things. Like I had horseback riding and I had an astrogeography reading. I had an abundance astrology reading. I was doing an emotional clearing session with someone's group. I was leading a coaching session with another group. And I had this reflexology and ear candling session. Oh, and I had eyelash and eyebrow tinting. So I had all of these things booked. And it's like, okay, note to self, it's not so fun to do the fun things for you when they're crammed all together. So I was feeling frazzled. I was feeling a little stressed. I was feeling agitated still. And I wasn't fully connecting, by the way. I'm telling you this after the fact, but at that moment, I was not fully connecting what was going on. In fact, I said to my magical mourning partner that morning, I'm like, gosh, I don't know what is going on. I've just, for the last week, been agitated and edgy and reactive. And every day I feel like I have tears. And yet I can't get a good cry. By the way, if you're making those statements, this is all a sign that you have pent up, unprocessed emotions that need support and space to process. And it's easy to forget, right? Like I'm sitting here thinking I'd already done the processing for this squirrel. I'd done some, then I had done this breathwork session, and yet all week I was still agitated and had the tears and couldn't cry. And then I told another friend, not kidding, that morning, I said, I need a release. I said, but I don't have space. And in order for me to feel safe and to truly release, I need to have space. And then a few minutes later, I had a little outburst. And this is another sign that you need a release and a clearing. So the night before, this would have been Wednesday night, I was trying to open the window and I nailed my wrist on we have shutter blinds. I nailed it on the shutters and it hurt to high heavens. And I screamed. And then John's like, what's wrong? I said, I can't explain it right now. And I just burst into tears. Okay, those type of outbursts are a sign that you have something unprocessed that needs to clear. And it's the universe / your body giving you ways to get little clearings to release some of the pressure. But really what you need is something bigger. So that happened. I released some of the pressure. The next morning, same thing. I had told my friend, I really need space. I need to clear. And then I don't even remember what happened, but something else happened. And guess what? I broke down. Oh, I actually had my own awareness of something personal in my life. And I looked at John and I told him, and I burst into tears and he held me. And I was like, man, okay. So there was a little pressure off. Meanwhile, I go through the day on Thursday, still even though I've cried multiple times that week, even though I'd had a couple outbursts, even though I knew I needed a release, it still hadn't happened. And this is true. I want to be really clear. It's okay that all of this was happening to me. It's not like I did anything wrong, and you're not doing anything wrong if this is happening to you. I think that's really important because we can't actually force or demand our bodies to let go and release. We absolutely cannot. We can create environments and have supportive practices that give our bodies space and allow them to feel safe to release, but we cannot force them, nor should we. Our bodies will release when they feel safe, when there's space. I know I sound like a broken record, but it's really important because a lot of times we don't feel safe and we don't have space in our lives. So when you feel safe, when you have space, and when it's time. And the time part you cannot control. When it's time for it to move out and through fully, and you have the space and you feel safe, then it will happen. So I didn't have all of those things lined up yet. Okay. So I head to my reflexology session and I get there and my body just knows, like, it knows this is a safe space. A lot of times, like, I'll be driving there and start yawning. Yawning is a big sign of emotional processing and energetic release. Like, my body will like prepare itself to get in that room because it knows it's such a safe space for me to let anything move through. I've been doing this for years with her. She's so intuitive. We're really energetically connected. Like, it's just, my body loves being there. So does my mind. So I'm heading there. I walk into the room. And it's funny because usually I do more intense services. I only had an hour and it was 30 minutes of reflexology, 30 minutes of ear candling. And Amy says, "Oh, Dana, how are you doing? I want to try this new standing little 5-minute thing for you first." So she goes and starts to work on my feet. And she goes to my left foot and she's like, "Whoa, are you having upper back pain?" And I said, "No, but last week on Sunday," so a few days ago, my left arch of my foot started to hurt out of the blue. And for a few days, it was like in pain. She said, "Well, the arch of your left foot, or wherever it was, is connected to your upper back and lungs." I was like, I don't feel anything there. She's like, "Wow, okay." She's working. She just felt my body holding immediately. And then I get on the table and I lie down and I said, "Amy, I'm just holding a lot." I said, "My jaw has been so sore." And she looks at me. She's like, "I can see your jaw is tight." And then I lift the blanket and I was holding my hands as fists. And this is another sign that your body isn't processing or it needs to process something. If you have unconscious tension, right? I also call this resting tension. So like when I'm in a relaxed state, if I'm like clenching my fists, if I'm clenching my belly, if my jaw is clenching, if my eyebrows are like furrowed, your teeth, if your tongue is like pressing to the roof of your mouth, these are all signs that your body's like trying to keep things in and hold it together, right? And I was like, my jaw often, she knows this, my jaw often gets tight and sore, but it has never been like this. It felt like a headache in a jaw. And so she's like, "Oh dear, what are you holding on to, body?" And immediately I started to feel some tears coming, right? That's okay. It's wonderful. Oh, and I unclench my hands and she comes and she starts just addressing my jaw a little bit. And she has a very specific way in which she resets my jaw. Thank God for her. I mean, if you have never had your jaw reset, go get yourself some Tibetan cranial. It is the most powerful freaking thing. All of the energy flow shifts when your jaw is back in alignment. And I guarantee you, a lot of our jaws are out of alignment. I mean, mine's out of alignment like every time I go see her. And she resets it. Oh, it's amazing. So she starts working on my jaw and it was crazy. Like she works with your breath. And as I was exhaling, like she was really getting into the right side of my jaw. That's specifically where it was holding the most. And as she's pushing to reset it, I literally felt like 100 pounds of force were going against her. She's trying to reset and help my jaw relax. And my jaw's like, "Nope." And it directly pushed against her. I felt it. It was so intense. And she's like, "Okay, we're not going to work on the jaw right now. We'll come back to that." And I just burst out laughing. Another great sign of emotional release and energetic release. And it was just so ridiculous and so hilarious. I'm like, my body is not feeling, it's like, no, we can't let go. Then she starts talking to me and she says, the right side of the jaw, and if you're a reflexologist and I'm quoting this wrong, please don't judge Amy. It's just that I'm misquoting. But basically what she told me was something along the lines of the right side of the jaw in traditional Chinese medicine is related to the lungs. Okay, here we're back at the lungs, which she noticed when she was working on my feet. She's like, and the lungs are somehow related to the large intestine, and that's connected to grief. And boom, she says grief, I start crying. And if you listened to last week's episode, I consciously made this connection. I made the connection. I said, I think this squirrel, we're back to the squirrel. I think this squirrel was a catalyst to allow me to grieve something deeper that I wasn't aware of. And holy buckets, was it ever. But I wasn't able to do that fully on my own, or I didn't. It didn't happen on its own. I did a lot of grieving, but not because just wait. So she starts talking, and she's talking about the grief, and she's like, oh, body, because I'm crying, grief. And I said, Amy, I had an incident with a squirrel. And I just burst out into tears, like intense, hysterical, gut-wrenching crying. Release. It's release. And I've done this with her before, and this is the space I hold for clients. This is not easy to be that vulnerable and breaking down that much in front of someone else. Like even with John, like he holds me very well in my grief and pain and crying. But, your body will not allow you to do this in front of just anyone. And it's why the space is so important and the safety. That's what I work deeply with my clients, is to create this experience of safety and space and compassion and gentleness. So the body first feels like, okay, we can let go, but then the mind has to allow it. Because for the mind to be that vulnerable, I'm lying on a table hysterically crying. And I also know at the moment, like I kept hearing my mind wanting to say, I'm sorry, but we don't apologize when we're in a release like that. That defeats the point. The point is you're held, and this is so fully and truly allowed. And so I'm letting it, and I'm just knowing, like, I can tell the mind wants to, like, okay, just suck it up, swallow it down, and like calm down, right? How many times when you cry does someone say calm down, or do you say yourself calm down? No. In this instance, especially when you're in this container, there's no need to calm down. The need is actually to turn it up, heighten it, bring it more forward. And Amy is so talented at this. She said, visualize the squirrel, see the squirrel. Because I told her, I said, I keep seeing him. She's like, bring him forward even more. Let him come up. And as that's happening, I'm crying more. And I said, oh my gosh, I can feel now the tension and the energy in my upper back, which I couldn't feel before. So your body is always giving you information. It is always telling you where there's emotional charges, where it needs attention, where things are unprocessed, but we can't even necessarily always attune to them. So I could feel my foot, but a lot of times after, events like that, like this could have been considered like a traumatic event, right? And it's not necessarily because of the squirrel, it's because of what the squirrel opened up for me. It's a micro event, but still the body responds similarly. When we have any sort of traumatic event, it's very, 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 very common for the body to shut down. And part of the shutting down is we can go numb. And so we actually can't really feel the signals that our bodies are giving us. Which is why, of course, our body awareness practices are so important. And I did very few of them last week after the squirrel. I wasn't doing them. So then I could feel the pain in my upper back. And I'm crying and letting it move through. And I told her, I said, and I hope this is vulnerable for me to share, but I want you to know, I can talk about it now because I fully processed it. Like I don't have any pangs of emotion now as I talk about this, which is the power of this work. So I was crying, and Amy was just gently, saying, you're safe. This is allowed. The dying of the squirrel doesn't mean you have to die. Your body, it's trying to protect you from seeing the death and holding on, and just like breathe and let it out. It's all okay. Like, this is okay. The squirrel had a lesson for you. Like, a lot of times it's really helpful to have that coaching as you're vulnerably just like crying, because it's like something to focus on instead of feeling like someone's just staring at you while you're breaking down. Like, that's a lot less comfortable. So to have like a narrative going on, even if I'm not fully listening, is really powerful. And so then I said, gosh, I just keep hearing the words, I miss him. And I said them out loud, and then, I did very little talking, right? But a lot was happening internally, and awareness was happening internally. And I said to her, but I don't know who I miss. Like, I haven't personally, consciously in this lifetime, thankfully, lost like an important male figure in my life. I've lost a couple important male figures, but not that I'm like was intimately close with or connected to or like was aware that like there was grief around it, right? I'm like, I keep hearing I miss him and it doesn't make sense. And here my mind was getting really stuck in the timeline and understanding. And that's really common, right? The mind wants to understand, the mind wants to know. So I just want to point that out. I say this all the time. You don't need the story or the why to process and release the what. And that was hard for my mind. My mind's like, who do I miss? Who am I grieving? What am I grieving? That was really the question, because this experience that I was going through on that table was deep grieving, very deep grieving. And it's grief that I apparently hadn't processed and wasn't ready. Oh no, you do not want to nor need to enter a deep grieving on your own or before it's time. Like, this is something you absolutely positively must trust and allow to happen when it's safe and when you're ready, because it is very tender, right? And it's very intimate. And once you go into that, you really want to be able, at least in the moment that you're there, to move through it fully. So you don't want to feel rushed or like you don't have time. Like, you have to be able to, as I like to say, squeeze as much juice out of the experience as possible. Like, let it all come out so that you don't have residual left over, which is what had happened to me the week before. Is I had done quite a bit of processing, but I think I just stopped short personally, because I'm like, this should be good. It was just squirrel, right? Like, this should be enough to honor the squirrel. Well, it wasn't about the squirrel, right? The squirrel was a messenger. He was a gift, a deep gift for me to actually crack me open enough to grieve in this way. And I still don't know what I was grieving. And it may have been a past life, or generational trauma. I mean, it could be anything that I was grieving, and I don't need to know. So as I'm laying there grieving, and it was going in and out, like sometimes it would settle, then the tears would come back again. Then I realized I had done this breathwork session 2 days after the squirrel incident, and I had forgotten about the squirrel incident at that point. It's crazy. I'm in the breathwork session, not thinking about the squirrel at all. It didn't even come up. But I fell into an old pattern of mine, which is pushing too hard. Have you ever pushed too hard? Do you ever try to get the most out of an experience? Do it right, do it good. I do that sometimes with healing. And I'm like, the harder it is, the better, right? The more intense, the better. Well, I'm on the table remembering this breathwork session. 2 days after the squirrel incident, I went so deep into the breathwork session, my entire body got paralyzed. I'm not kidding. I couldn't move my body for, 15 minutes. I am comfortable enough in myself and having done breath work and all of that I didn't freak out, but just warn you, that could definitely freak you out. I had never had this extent. I think it's called tetany. I had never had this intensity of it. Sometimes, usually like my hands or my lips pucker and freeze. I couldn't move my body. And what that usually means, if I understand this correctly, is that it means you're needing to let go, but the body doesn't want to. And it's not. In my interpretation, it's like you're pushing beyond the body's natural ability and desire. You're like manufacturing release. I'm not a breathwork professional, so that might not be correct, but that's how it feels in my body. And what I think was happening was I had experienced that grief event on Wednesday, did some clearing. I felt fine actually on Thursday. And then Friday did the breath work, pushed too hard and overshot. And my body was like, fuck this. And it locked down. Because since then, it was after that event, it was starting on Sunday, I think, where my foot was in pain and my jaw was locked up. Right. And then I was agitated. I had tears. Right. So it's like, it's so great to reflect on things like this in hindsight because it tells us and shows us how our bodies have been and always are communicating to us. And it's fine that I didn't recognize it. It's fine. Like life happens, but to take the pause and to reflect on all of the signals that were coming through that I wasn't aware of, I think it's really powerful. And I think it builds trust in your body in how magical it is, right? Your body is really, really wise and it is communicating. It's more that we're disconnected from the communication. And that's okay. But when you see how strongly your body has been communicating, like when I look back from that week time period, it's like, damn, body, you're amazing. You're smart. You're wise. And also, we can trust timing. Like that was a hard week for me, but it wasn't bad inherently. And the crazy thing was I had booked this reflexology session with Amy like months ago. And how could I have known that the timing aligned so beautifully that it happened a week after that event? I don't know if it was a traumatic event. Well, it was in that it triggered me to grieve something that I hadn't grieved. And then to end up a week later on the table with Amy, who happens to be, listen, it takes to hold someone in that grieving and to stay stable and not try to fix it. I mean, I mentioned this a little bit in last week's podcast too. And to allow it to happen so beautifully this is not something that everyone, I don't think, can do. Certainly not in like that professional setting. Like she held me so well and definitely not the session I had signed up for, but it's what came through. And here's the craziest part that I think is really important to recognize. Like I've just told you about all this pain, how beautifully Amy held me in my grief. And me like knowing the power of this, right? Because this is the work I do with my clients. But also this, I still had my face reflexology and we still were able to do ear candling in the hour, which means my breakdown was, I think, probably maybe maximum 30 minutes, probably more like 20. And the most intense part, like it can feel, that's why it's so important to have someone skilled to support you. You know, the most intense part, like it can feel like you're just falling apart and unsafe, which is why to have someone help you feel safe, like in the emotion, in the moment, is so powerful because then you can get through to the other side. Because then I did get through to the other side and my breath started to stabilize, not because I wanted it to, but on its own. I started to giggle again. I actually laugh a lot in emotional processing. It's like a big part of my processing is like hysterical laughing, which is honestly, it's really funny and quite fun. So then I started laughing and then I started stabilizing and then I felt the stillness. And this will happen almost every time is before you experience and go through the heightened emotion, you're going to have that charged, agitated, unsettled energy, maybe some tears, but it's energy that feels really uncomfortable and is like your whole system feels like off. And a lot of us stay in that state. That can show up as anxiety too. A lot of us stay in that state of like, right? Because we don't want to go there or we don't feel like we can, right? But then you go into the intensity of the storm and you ride out the storm with the crashing waves and the thrashing and the wind and whatever comes through. If you can stay with it through that storm, it's like the buildup, we usually get stuck there. But if we dive into the storm and we can stay through and stay with it, we end up on the other side of the storm, which is calm, clear waters. Every time, calm, clear waters. Insight comes in that space. Wisdom comes in that space. Your inner voice speaks so clearly to you in that space. And a lot of us are trying to get to the calm, clear waters, to the peace, the bliss, the joy, the stillness, that calm sense in your entire body. We're trying to get there by frog leaping the storm. And my invitation to you is to be willing to ride out the storm. Because everything else, if you're trying to get from the buildup, the agitation, the anxiety, and you're trying to move straight to calm, any tool you're using there that isn't honoring the actual processing of the emotion and going into the storm is not going to give you that true peace, that true calm, that true stillness, that true bliss and joy. It might even end up numbing you, right? You might end up feeling like a temporary calm through numbness, which is fine, remind you. But if you're wanting to feel that true gift of peace and stillness and ease and hearing your inner voice with clarity, we got to go through the storm. And I'm so fucking grateful that this unfolded the way it did, and for Amy, and for my body, and for the squirrel that broke my heart, because he allowed me to crack open this deep grief that I didn't even know was in me. And now I've processed it, and you don't have to reprocess these big things once you've processed them. So I might have other griefs and things like that, but what I process is processed and integrated back into my body. And so I invite you, this was not planned. I couldn't have planned this, but I don't know a better campaign or better words or marketing to invite you to join the emotional edit than these stories that I just went through in the past week, because this is the power of the work. This is the power of being willing to face the storm and to show up and to come out on the other side, right? To feel better by getting better at feeling, right? But it's not that false sense of feeling better. It's feeling better. It's like the true peace that we're all seeking, that true stillness and calm. That's the feeling better. But the only way we can get there is by getting better at feeling and being able to dive into the storms with confidence and come out on the other side. And that is what I'll be supporting you with in the emotional edit. So I would love to have you there. The link will be in the show notes, or message me on Instagram at Dana_Evans, or go to alignful.com/email-capture. And I'm so freaking excited to work with you. This is going to be magic making. And the more of us who can do this work, the more steadiness and peace we'll find all around. All right, sending you so much love. Happy day, happy week, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tuning In podcast. As always, if this would resonate with anyone you know, please share the episode. You can follow along with my journey on Instagram at Dana_Evans, or find me on my website at alignful.com.